You have never heard his name. You have never seen his face in a magazine, never watched him walk a red carpet, never read a profile in any publication that claims to track the world's wealthiest people. And yet the building you work in, the platform you consume news on, the pharmaceutical company that made the medication in your cabinet, he has a position in all three. He is not hiding. He simply never needed you to know he existed. That distinction is everything. Please subscribe and activate the button to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can bring you more relevant content and so YouTube can notify you when we publish new videos. The kind that needs to be seen, and the kind that has moved so far beyond the need for validation that visibility itself has become a liability, something to be managed, minimized, and ultimately eliminated as thoroughly as the legal and social architecture of a modern life permits. The first kind fills the pages of business magazines and the feeds of financial media. It generates profiles and podcasts and speaking invitations and the specific cultural apparatus of celebrated success that a certain class of wealthy person participates in with genuine enthusiasm. This wealth is real. The people who hold it are often formidable, but they are, in the framework of actual power, the visible layer, the surface. The second kind does not generate profiles. It does not accept speaking invitations. It does not appear on lists, not because it falls below the threshold, but because the people who compile the lists have never been given the information that would put it there, and the people who hold this wealth have spent significant resources ensuring that the information remains unavailable. This video is about the second kind. Not about tax evasion or criminal concealment, though the line between legal opacity and illegal concealment is genuinely blurry at the highest altitudes and genuinely contested in every jurisdiction where serious money lives. About something more fundamental. About the deliberate, strategic, philosophically coherent choice to exercise enormous power without ever letting the world know that the power exists or that you are the one exercising it. This choice is not made out of fear. Fear is for people who have something to hide in the ordinary sense, a specific secret, a specific exposure, a specific vulnerability that visibility would reveal. The people we are describing have something more sophisticated than a secret. They have a system, a complete, carefully maintained orientation toward the world in which their absence from the public conversation is not a gap in the record but the record's most important feature. The system begins with a recognition that most people never reach because most people never have the resources to reach it. That fame and power are not only different things, they are, at the highest levels, inversely related. The more famous you are, the more your behavior is observed, analyzed, criticized, and constrained by the expectations your visibility creates. The more your decisions are anticipated by people whose interests are affected by them, the more your relationships are colored by others' awareness of what you represent. The more you become, in a very real sense, a public resource rather than a private agent, someone whose actions are subject to a form of democratic assessment that has nothing to do with any formal democratic process. The anonymous billionaire has solved this problem not by navigating it but by removing himself from it entirely. He does not manage his public image because he has no public image to manage. He does not concern himself with how his decisions will be perceived because the people making the perceptions do not know the decisions are his. He does not moderate his positions, his investments, his political engagements, his commercial strategies, in response to a public audience that does not know he is a relevant actor. He is free in a way that no visible billionaire, no matter how wealthy, no matter how insulated by lawyers and advisors and security infrastructure, has ever been. That freedom is the product, the wealth is the prerequisite, the anonymity is the mechanism. And what the mechanism enables, the specific quality of action available to a person of significant means who operates entirely outside the scrutiny of public observation, is the subject of everything that follows. But first, understand what the life actually looks like. Because the external picture of anonymous wealth is almost always wrong in the same direction. It imagines hermits, recluses, people who have withdrawn from the world in exchange for privacy. That is not what this is. The anonymous billionaire is not withdrawn from the world. He is more present in it than almost anyone you could name, more connected, more influential, more active in the decisions that shape markets and industries and political outcomes. He simply participates in the world through channels that carry no attribution, through structures that bear no name the public recognizes, through relationships maintained at a level of discretion that makes them invisible to any observer who was not already inside the circle. He is everywhere. You just have no way of knowing it. The first thing the anonymous billionaire builds is not a house or a portfolio or a corporate structure. It is a perimeter. Not a physical perimeter, though physical security is part of it, an informational perimeter, a carefully constructed boundary between what the world can know about him and what the world is permitted to know, a boundary maintained not through aggressive concealment, which draws attention, but through the systematic management of every point at which information about him could enter the public record. The property is held through an entity. The entity is managed by a nominee. The nominee is a professional, a lawyer, or a trust officer, or a corporate services firm whose name appears on the registry and who has no meaningful knowledge of the ultimate beneficial owner and has been engaged through a structure designed to ensure that even aggressive investigation produces the entity but not the person. The car service is engaged through a personal assistant whose personal life is subject to a confidentiality agreement so comprehensive that discussing who they work for with a friend over dinner is a breach. The aviation is operated through a management company that does not disclose client manifests and whose tail numbers are registered in jurisdictions that do not participate in the tracking databases that aviation journalists use to follow private aircraft movements. The social calendar, to the extent that it produces any documentary record, is managed with the same precision as the financial architecture. Invitations to events where attendance generates a record are declined. Invitations to environments where presence can be controlled are accepted, when accepted at all. The gatherings that matter, the specific, rare, high-density conversations between people of genuine consequence, happen in private residences, on private vessels, in venues booked under names that do not connect to the actual purpose of the gathering. None of this is unusual within the circle. It is simply how things are done. The discretion is mutual, ambient, assumed. No one has to request it. No one has to explain why it matters. Everyone present already understands, at the level of bone-deep professional conditioning, that the value of being in certain rooms is inseparable from the certainty that what happens there stays there. The residences themselves deserve specific attention, because they are simultaneously the most luxurious and the least visible expressions of this kind of wealth. The anonymous billionaire typically maintains several, not as a display of abundance. Display is precisely what he has structured his life to avoid, but because multiple residences in multiple jurisdictions provide something more valuable than comfort. They provide optionality. The ability to be in any country, under any legal jurisdiction, at any moment, without the kind of planning and notification that a single primary residence requires. The ability to move in response to conditions, political, legal, personal, without the movement generating the kind of documentary trail that a single residence life inevitably produces. Each property is managed by staff selected for discretion as the primary qualification, not warmth, not efficiency, though efficiency matters. Discretion. The ability to maintain a household at the standard required by serious wealth without generating the social footprint that household management normally creates. The staff who manage these properties are often career specialists in this specific field, people who have spent their professional lives serving a clientele for whom privacy is the non-negotiable requirement, and who have built their own professional identity around the absolute discretion that the work demands. They are paid accordingly. The properties themselves are not the maximalist expressions of wealth that magazine profiles describe when covering the homes of visible billionaires. They are not designed to impress. They are designed for a specific quality of life, high, yes, in every material sense, but oriented around comfort and function and the specific luxuries that matter to someone who will never invite a journalist inside and never derive social benefit from the impressiveness of the space. The art on the walls was not acquired at public auction, where provenance records and bitter identities create documentary trails. It was acquired privately, through dealers who operate in the specific tier of the market, where significant works change hands without generating any public record. The wine is not from the cellars of famous chateaux that keep records of their significant clients. It is from sources whose discretion has been established over years of careful relationship. The furniture, the materials, the specific quality of everything in these spaces, it is exceptional in the way that only becomes visible to someone with enough exposure to exceptional things to calibrate the difference. Not impressive to the casual observer, precisely calibrated to the experienced one. The signal operates on a frequency only the right receivers can detect. That is the point of all of it. Power, at the level we are describing, does not announce itself. It does not need to. Power that requires announcement is power that is still performing for an audience. Power that has moved beyond that need, that has internalized its own legitimacy so completely that the question of how it is perceived by outsiders no longer registers as relevant, that power operates in a register that is genuinely invisible to the people it most affects. The anonymous billionaire's influence over markets and industries does not operate through the mechanisms that financial journalism tracks, not through disclosed positions and 13F filings and publicly visible board seats. It operates through a network of relationships carefully maintained, strategically positioned, geographically dispersed, that allows information to flow in one direction and decisions to flow in another, without any single interaction being legible as the exercise of power it actually is. The network is built over decades. It cannot be built faster than that because it is not primarily a financial construction. It is a trust construction, and trust, the specific, high-stakes, professionally consequential trust that operates at this level, is not a function of reputation or charm, or even demonstrated competence. It is a function of time and consistency and the repeated experience, by the people in the network, that this person has kept his word when keeping it was costly, and protected their interests when no contract required him to. Each node in the network represents a person, not an institution. Institutions are transparent in ways that people are not, and the anonymous billionaire has learned to operate through people rather than through the institutional affiliations those people carry. The senior official who controls a specific regulatory decision, the editor whose publication shapes the conversation in a specific industry, the dealmaker whose access to a specific category of private transaction is unmatched, the scientist whose opinion determines which research directions receive institutional support and which do not. These relationships are not transactional in the crude sense. The anonymous billionaire does not call the official and request a favorable ruling. That is not how this works. The relationship is cultivated over years through genuine intellectual engagement, through demonstrated interest in the other person's work and concerns, through the kind of sustained attention that is rare enough at this level to be genuinely valued by the recipient. When the moment arrives, when the relationship is relevant, when a decision is being made that the anonymous billionaire has an interest in, the influence operates through the relationship's natural logic, through a conversation that flows from years of genuine connection, and that would be almost impossible for an outside observer to identify as the exercise of power rather than the exchange of perspectives between people who have known each other a long time. This is not manipulation in the theatrical sense. It is something more sophisticated and more permanent. It is the cultivation of conditions under which the people making important decisions naturally want to make them in ways that align with the interests of someone who has spent years making himself genuinely valuable to them. The outcomes are real. The mechanism leaves no fingerprints. Now consider the market dimension of this power, because it operates with the same invisibility and the same precision. The anonymous billionaire does not take positions large enough to trigger disclosure requirements. He distributes exposure across enough entities, enough jurisdictions, enough asset classes, that no single position is significant enough to attract regulatory attention. The aggregate, if it could be assembled, if someone with access to every relevant registry in every relevant jurisdiction simultaneously assembled the complete picture, would reveal a market presence of genuine consequence. But the information is dispersed by design, across systems that do not communicate with each other, and that no single investigative effort can simultaneously access. Within this dispersed architecture, information flows toward him from every node in the network. Not through any illegal channel, the relationships are the channel. The senior executive who respects him enough to discuss the company's strategic thinking in a private conversation. The regulator who considers him a trusted sounding board and thinks aloud in his presence about the direction of upcoming policy. The scientist whose research direction he has quietly supported and who shares findings before they become public. None of these is insider trading in a legally prosecutable sense. Each is an example of the information asymmetry that sustained, deep, genuine relationships naturally produce. The decisions made on that information, through structures that are legal and across timelines that make the connection between information and action difficult to trace, produce returns that look, from the outside, like extraordinary investment judgment. They are not extraordinary judgment. They are the logical outcome of 30 years of network construction. The network is the alpha. Everything else is execution. But here is what none of the financial analysis of this world ever fully addresses. The network, the structure, the anonymity, all of it is in service of something that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with a specific, ancient, almost primal human need. What comes next reveals not just how these people operate but why, and the why changes everything. The why is legacy. Not legacy in the way the word is used in corporate communications, the branded philanthropic initiative, the named building at a university, the foundation whose annual report is a glossy document describing impact in carefully selected metrics. That is legacy for people who need the acknowledgement that they have left something behind. The anonymous billionaire has no interest in acknowledgement. What he is building is something older and more serious than a named building. He is building continuity. The continuity of a specific way of operating in the world, of a specific set of values about what matters and what does not, and how power should be held and what it should be for, of a structure financial, relational, philosophical that will function after he is gone with the same effectiveness it functions while he is present, that will serve his children and his children's children, not as a financial inheritance, which is the simple part, but as a complete system. A way of being in the world that is adapted to the specific conditions and demands of operating at the highest level of power, without the specific vulnerabilities that visibility creates. The transmission of this system to the next generation is the most important project of the anonymous billionaire's later years, and it is the most difficult because what he is transmitting cannot be written down, not completely, not in any document whose existence would itself create the kind of record he has spent his life avoiding. The transmission happens through proximity, through the deliberate exposure of children and successors to the specific environments, relationships, and situations in which the system becomes legible, through a form of apprenticeship that is never announced as such that looks, from the outside, like a parent involving their child in their work, but that is actually a systematic education in a curriculum that no school offers and no book fully describes. The curriculum covers things that most educational frameworks do not treat as learnable. How to read the specific quality of attention in a room and understand from that reading who has power and who is performing power. How to maintain relationships across decades without those relationships ever becoming either purely transactional or dangerously personal. How to make decisions under conditions of genuine uncertainty, not the managed uncertainty of a business school case study, but the real, irreducible uncertainty of situations where the information available is insufficient and the cost of being wrong is permanent. How to be comfortable in silence, not the silence of social awkwardness, but the deliberate, confident silence of someone who understands that most conversations reveal more than they need to, and that the information differential between the person who speaks and the person who listens is almost always in the listener's favor. The children who absorb this education are not always the most conventionally successful. The qualities being transmitted do not always produce the kind of visible achievement that generates conventional admiration. Some of them live, to outside observers, lives of comfortable obscurity, successful in non-spectacular ways, present in important rooms without anyone quite being able to articulate why they are there or what they contribute. What they contribute is exactly what their education prepared them to contribute. They maintain the network, they tend the relationships, they extend the architecture into the next generation of contexts, new industries, new geographies, new political configurations with the same patient deliberateness that built the original structure. And here is what this transmission produces over generations that no single generation could produce alone. Institutional memory. The accumulation of knowledge about how specific people behave under pressure, about which relationships have held through genuine tests, and which have shown the specific fragility that only reveals itself when the test is real, about which industries are structurally durable, and which are dependent on regulatory conditions that can change, about how political systems move, and which actors within them are genuinely reliable, and which are reliable only in favorable conditions. This institutional memory is not stored anywhere. It is carried in the minds of the people who have been inside the structure long enough to have absorbed it, who have attended enough of the right conversations, witnessed enough of the right decisions, been present for enough of the moments that clarified what the structure is actually, for that the knowledge lives in them the way that cultural knowledge lives in a civilization. It shapes their judgments without being consciously consulted. It produces reactions to situations that the people around them cannot fully explain because they have not seen enough of the pattern to recognize the diagnosis. That accumulated wisdom, carried by people who will never be interviewed about it and who would deny its existence if asked, is the most durable competitive advantage that exists in the world of serious wealth. It cannot be bought. It can only be built, over generations, by people who understood before most that the point was never the money. There is a gathering that happens once a year in a location that changes annually and is communicated to attendees through a channel that generates no digital record. No press is invited. No press is aware it is happening. The guest list is not compiled by any organization with a public existence. It is assembled through personal relationships through the specific, trust-verified network of people who have earned their place in the room over years of demonstrated reliability. Attending requires not an invitation in the formal sense, but a confirmation, extended through a trusted intermediary, that your presence is welcome. The people who attend are not the people you see at Davos. They are not the people whose names appear in the coverage of Davos. They are, in some cases, people whose names the Davos attendees would recognize, would respond to with the specific alertness of someone encountering a reference that is significant but rarely surfaced publicly. And in other cases, they are people whose names mean nothing to the Davos crowd because the Davos crowd operates in a register where these people have never needed to appear. What happens at this gathering is not sinister in any cinematic sense. There is no ceremony, no formal agenda, no coordinated decision-making that would constitute anything a legal framework could address. There is conversation, sustained, substantive, extraordinarily well-informed conversation between people who each carry fragments of a picture that no single person possesses completely. What emerges from the conversation is not agreement. It is something more diffuse and more consequential than agreement. It is calibration. The individual recalibration of each attendee's understanding of how the world currently stands, where the pressures are building, where the opportunities are forming, where the existing arrangements are more fragile than public appearances suggest through exposure to the perspectives of the other people in the room. Each person leaves with a slightly updated model of reality, a model informed by sources that no public information source can replicate, and each person acts on that model, in the months that follow, through the specific decisions available to someone of their particular position and capability. No coordination was declared, no conspiracy was assembled, and yet the decisions made in the months after the gathering, by the people who attended it, tend to share a directional coherence that would be visible to anyone who could observe them simultaneously, which, by design, no one can. This is the highest expression of what anonymous power actually looks like in operation, not the dramatic lever-pulling of conspiracy fantasy. The quiet, distributed, individually rational behavior of people who share a more accurate model of reality than anyone outside their circle possesses, and who act on that model with the patience and precision that their structural position allows. The outcomes, observed individually, look like good judgment. Observed together, they look like something more organized than that. But the organization is informational, not conspiratorial. The advantage is epistemic, not procedural. These people make better decisions because they know more of what is actually true, and they know more of what is actually true because they have spent decades building the relationships and structures and trust that cause important information to flow toward them rather than away. This is the system. This is what the anonymous billionaire has built, maintains, and is in the process of transmitting to the people who will carry it forward when he is no longer the one holding it. The question that every person watching this will eventually arrive at, and that I want to address directly before this video ends, is not whether this is fair. It is not whether it should be different. Those are important questions that deserve serious attention in other contexts. The question that is actually useful, in a practical and immediate sense, for the person who has now seen the architecture clearly, is this: what does understanding this change about how you operate? The answer is not to replicate the system, not because it is wrong, but because systems built over generations cannot be built from scratch in a single lifetime, and attempting to do so at the wrong scale, with the wrong resources, produces a parody of the thing rather than the thing itself. The answer is to understand where the leverage points are, where the architecture, for all its sophistication, is thinner than it appears, where the information asymmetry that sustains it can be partially closed by someone who now understands its structure, where the access, for all its careful restriction, has entry points that are not visible from the outside, but become visible once you understand the logic of how the network was built and what it actually requires. Every closed system has a perimeter, and every perimeter has the places where it is most carefully maintained. And those places are always, if you know where to look, the places where entry is most available to the person who understands what is actually being protected. The anonymous billionaire built the walls high so that no one would look for the door. You now know the walls are there. The door is your problem to find. Luxury power exists for one reason only: to reveal what the elite pay to hide. Subscribe to Luxury Power and hit the bell now. Every week, a new secret is uncovered. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our global audience. Everything you saw here is based on real cases, verified contracts, and documented facts. We don't glorify wealth, we dissect it. Do you still think money buys freedom? Tell us in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see the truth. And remember, even the most expensive life can be a gilded cage. See you in the next video.